The Ancient War of the Knights. By Limojon de Saint Didier. Or Interview. Of the Philosopher's Stone with Gold and Mercury. Touching the true matter, of which those who are learned in the secrets of nature, can make the Philosopher's Stone, following the rules of a suitable practice, and with the help of lunatic Vulcan. The subject of this interview is a dispute that Gold and Mercury once had with the Philosopher's Stone. This is how a true philosopher, who has achieved possession of this great secret, speaks. I protest to you before God, and on the eternal salvation of my soul, with a sincere heart, touched with compassion for those who have been engaged in great research for a long time, and, I assure you, to all of you who cherish this marvelous art, that all our work takes birth from a single thing, and that in this thing the work finds its perfection, without it needing anything, whether it is other than being dissolved and coagulated, which it must do by itself, without the recourse of any foreign thing. When we put ice in a vase placed on the fire, we see that the heat causes it to dissolve into water. We must use it in the same way with our stone, which only needs help of the artist, of the operation of his hands, and of the action of natural fire, because it will never resolve itself, when she would remain eternally on earth. This is why we must help her, in such a way, however, that we add nothing to it that is foreign and contrary to it. Just as God produces wheat in the fields, and it is then up to us to grind it into flour, knead it and make bread, likewise our art requires that we do the same thing. God created this mineral for us, so that we can take him alone and decompose his coarse and thick body, that we separate and take for ourselves what is good within us, that we reject what is superfluous, and that from a deadly venom, we learn to make a sovereign medicine. To give you a more perfect understanding of this pleasant conversation, I will give you the account of the dispute which arose between the Philosopher's Stone, Gold and Mercury, so that those who have been applying themselves for a long time to research of our art, and who know how to treat metals and minerals, will be able to be sufficiently enlightened, to arrive straight at the goal that they are proposed. It is however necessary that we apply ourselves to knowing externally and internally the essence and properties of all things which are on earth, and that we penetrate into the depth of the operations, of which nature is capable. Narrative. Gold and Mercury went one day armed, to fight, and to subjugate the stone. Gold, animated with fury, began to speak in this way.
Gold, how do you have the temerity to rise above me, and my brother Mercury, and to claim preference over us? You who are only one worm, bloated with venom. Do you not know that I am the most precious, the most constant, and the first of all metals? Don't you know that the monarchs, the princes, and the peoples also make all their wealth consist of me, and of my brother Mercury? And that you are on the contrary the dangerous enemy of men and metals, instead of the more skillful doctors continuing to publish.
Stone. At these words, full of anger, the stone replied, without being moved, my dear Gold, why don't you get angry with God sooner, and why don't you ask him why he didn't create in you what is in me?
Gold, it is God himself who gave me the honor, the reputation, and the brilliant brilliance, which make me so estimable. It is for this reason that I am so sought after by everyone. One of my greatest perfections is to be an unalterable metal in the fire, and out of the fire. Also everyone loves me and runs after me. But you are only a fugitive and a deceiver, who deceives all men. This is seen in that you fly away and escape from the hands of those who work with you.
Stone. It is true, my dear Gold, it is God who gave you honor, constancy, and beauty, which make you precious. This is why you are obliged to give thanks, eternal to his divine goodness, and do not despise others, as you do, for I can tell you that you are not that gold, of which the writings of the philosophers make mention, but this gold is hidden in my bosom. It is true, I admit, I sink into the fire, and do not remain there, however you know very well that God and nature have given me this quality, and that it must be like this, especially since my fluidity turns to the advantage of the artist, who knows how to extract it. Know, however, that my soul remains constantly within me, and that it is more stable and more fixed than you are, however gold you are, and what are all your brothers and all your companions. Neither water nor fire, whatever it may be, can destroy it or consume it, when they would act on it for as long as the world lasts. It is therefore not my fault if I am sought after by artists, who do not know how to work with me, nor in what way I must be prepared. They often mix me with foreign matters, which are, entirely, contrary to me. They add water, powders, and other similar things to me, which destroy my nature and the properties that are essential to me, so there is barely one among 100 who works with me. They all strive to seek the truth of art in you, and in your brother Mercury. This is why they all wander, and this is why their works are false. They themselves are a fine example of this, for they use their gold in vain and try to destroy it. They have nothing left of all this. It is you, gold, who is the first cause of this misfortune. You know very well that without me, it is impossible to make any gold or any silver that is perfect, and that it is only me who has this wonderful advantage. Why then do you suffer that almost the whole world bases its operations on you, and on Mercury? If you still had some remnant of honesty, you would certainly prevent men from abandoning themselves to an entirely certain loss, but as, instead of that, you do quite the opposite, I can truthfully maintain that it is you alone who are a deceiver.
Gold. I want to convince you through the authority of philosophers that the truth of art can be accomplished with me. Read Hermes. He speaks thus: "The sun is his father and the moon his mother, but I am the only one who is compared to the sun." Aristotle, Avicenna, Pliny, Serapion, Hippocrates, Dioscorides, Meju, Rhasis, Averroes, Geber, Raymond Lull, Albert the Great, Arnaud de Villeneuve, Thomas d'Aquin, and a large number of other philosophers, whom I pass over in silence to avoid being long, they all write clearly and distinctly that metals and physical tincture are only composed of sulfur and mercury, that this sulfur must be red, incombustible, constantly resistant to fire, and that the mercury must be clear and well purified. They speak like this without any reservation. They openly name me by my own name, and say that in gold, that is to say in me, is found red, digestible, fixed and incombustible sulfur, that which is true and entirely evident, for there is no one who does not know well. Mercury was of the sentiment of gold. He approved his speech, maintained that everything his brother had just said was true, and that the work could be perfected in the way that the philosophers had written above allege. He even added that everyone should know, asses, how great was the mutual friendship that there was between gold and him, preferable to all other metals, that there was no one who could not easily judge by the testimony of his own eyes that goldsmiths and other similar craftsmen knew very well that when they wanted to gild some work, they could not do without the mixture of gold and mercury, and that they made the conjunction in a very short time, without difficulty, and with very little work.
Stone. At this speech, the stone began to laugh and said to them, "In truth, you both deserve that people are making fun of you, and of your demonstration, but it is you, now, that I admire even more, seeing that you are so convinced of the advantage you have of being good at certain things. Can you really convince yourself that the ancient philosophers wrote, as they did, in a sense which should be understood in the ordinary way? And do you think we should simply interpret their words literally?"
Gold. I am certain that the philosophers and the artists that I have just cited have not written a lie. They are all of the same feeling regarding the virtue that I possess. It is very true that there were found some who wanted to seek in things entirely distant, the power and the properties which are in me. They worked on certain herbs, about animals, on blood, on urine, on the hair, on sperm, and on things of this nature. These have undoubtedly deviated from the true path, and have sometimes written falsehoods. But it is not the same with the masters whom I have named. We have certain proof that they indeed possess this great art. This is why we must add faith to their writings.
Stone. I do not doubt that these philosophers had an entire knowledge of art, except, however, some of those you have alleged, for there are among them, but very few, who have ignored it, and who have written about it only on what they have heard about it. But when the true philosophers simply name gold and mercury, like the principles of art, they only use these terms to hide their knowledge from the ignorant, and from those who are unworthy of this science, because they know very well that these spirits, vulgar, only attach themselves to the names of things, to the recepts, and to the procedures, which they find written, without examining whether there is a solid basis in what they put into practice. But learned men who read good books, with application and accuracy, consider all things with prudence, examine the relation, and the agreement which there is between one thing and another, and by this means, they penetrate into the foundation of the art, so that by reasoning and by meditation, they discover, finally, that it is the matter of the philosophers, among whom there is none who wanted to indicate it, nor to make it known openly, and by his own name. They clearly declare themselves on this, when they say that they never reveal less, the secret, of their art, than when they speak clearly, and in the ordinary way, of stating themselves, but, they admit, on the contrary, that when they use similes, figures, and parables, it is in truth in these places, of their writings, that they manifest their art, for, the philosophers, after having discussed gold and Mercury, do not fail to then declare, and assure, that their gold is not the vulgar sun, or gold, and that their Mercury is not the common Mercury either. Here is the reason. Gold is a perfect metal, which because of the perfection, which nature has given it, cannot be pushed, by art, to a more perfect degree, so that in any way one can work with gold, whatever artifice we use, when we extract its color, and its dye, 100 times, the artist will never make more gold and will never dye a greater quantity of metal than there was color and dye in the gold, from which it was extracted. It is for this reason that philosophers say that we must seek perfection in imperfect things, and that we will find it there. You can read in the Rosary what I tell you here. Raymond Lull, whom you quoted to me, has the same feeling. He assures, that what must be made better, does not have to be perfect, because in what is perfect, there is nothing to change, and we would much sooner destroy its nature, than to add something to its perfection.
Gold. I am not unaware that the philosophers speak in this way. However, this can be applied to my brother Mercury, who is still imperfect, but if we are joined together, he then receives from me the perfection, which he lacks, for he is of the female sex, and I am of the male sex, which makes philosophers say that art is a homogeneous whole. You see an example of this in the procreation of men. For no child can be born without the coupling of the male and the female, that is to say, without the conjunction of one with the other. We have a similar example in animals and in all living beings.
Stone. It is true that your brother Mercury is imperfect, and therefore he is not the Mercury of the sages. Also, if you were conjoined together, and you were thus kept in the fire for the course of several years, to try to unite perfectly with each other, it will always happen, the same thing, namely, that as soon as Mercury feels the action of fire, it separates from you, sublimates itself, flies away, and leaves you alone below. That if you are dissolved in strong water, if you are reduced to a single mass, if you are resolved, if you are distilled, and if you are coagulated, you will, however, only ever produce a powder, and a red precipitate. If this powder is projected onto an imperfect metal, it does not dye it. These are the experiments that those who devote themselves to the research of chemistry have made, to their great harm, over a long series of years. This is also, or results in, all the knowledge that they have acquired through their work. But as for the proverb of the ancients, which you want to take advantage of, that art is an entirely homogeneous whole, that no child can be born without the male and the female, and you imagine that by this the philosophers mean you and your brother Mercury, I must tell you, clearly, that this is false, and that it is inappropriate to hear it from you, although in these same places, the philosophers speak correctly, and tell the truth. I assure you, that here is the cornerstone, which they laid. Can you imagine that it must be the same with metals, as with things that have life? What happens to you in this case is what happens to all false artists, for when you read such passages in the philosophers, you do not endeavor to examine them further, to try to discover whether such expressions quadrant and agree or not with what has been said before, or which is said subsequently. However, you must know that everything that the philosophers have written of the work in figurative terms must be here from me alone, and not from anything else which is in the world. Since it is only me who can do what they say, and that without me, it is impossible to make no gold, nor any silver, which is convertible.
Gold. Good God! Are you not ashamed to tell such a big lie? And are you not afraid of committing a sin by glorifying yourself to such an extent that you dare to attribute to yourself alone everything that so many wise and learned people have written about this art, for so many centuries? You, who are only filthy, impure, and venomous matter. And you admit, notwithstanding that this art is a perfectly homogeneous whole? You further say that without you, no gold or silver can be made, which is true as being a universal thing. Is this not a manifest contradiction? Especially since several learned people have applied themselves with such care and accuracy to the curious research they have carried out.
Stone. My dear Orr, do not be surprised by what I have just told you, and do not be so imprudent as to impute a lie to me, who is older than you. If you were to deceive me in this, you should rightly excuse my great age. Then you are aware that old age must be respected. To show you that I told the truth, in order to defend my honor, I only want to rely on the authority of the same masters, whom you cited to me, and who, consequently, you have no right to object. Let's see, particularly Hermes. He speaks like this. It is true, without falsehood, certain, and very true, that what is below is similar to what is above, and that which is above is like that which is below. It is by these things that miracles of one thing can be done. This is how Aristotle speaks. How admirable is this thing, which contains in itself all the things we need. She kills herself, and then it comes back to life of its own accord. She marries herself, she gets pregnant herself, she is born herself, she resolves herself in her own blood, it coagulates again with it, and takes on a hard consistency, she turns white, she turns red of herself, we add nothing more to it, and we change nothing, except that we separate its crudeness and earthiness. The philosopher Plato speaks of me in these terms. It is one single thing, of one and the same kind in itself. She has a body, a soul, a spirit, and the four elements, over which she dominates. He lacks nothing, it has no need of other bodies, because it generates itself, all things are of her, through her, and in her. I could produce several other testimonies for you here, but as this is not necessary, I will pass them over in silence, so as not to be boring, and as you have just spoken to me about particular processes, I will explain to you in how they differ from art. Some artists who worked with me pushed their work so far that they succeeded in separating from me my spirit, which contains my tincture, so that mixing it with other metals and minerals, they managed to communicate somewhat of my virtues and my strengths, to the metals which have some affinity and some friendship with me. However, the artists who succeeded by this path, and who have found only a part of the art, are truly in a very small number, but as they did not know the origin from which the dyes come, it was impossible for them to push their work further, and they did not ultimately find that there was much use in their process. But if these artists had carried their research beyond, and had carefully examined that it is the woman of my own, that they had sought it, and that they had united me to her, it was then that I could have died 1,000 times more, but, instead, they entirely destroyed my own nature, by mixing me with foreign things. This is why, although in making their calculation, they found some advantage, very mediocre however, in comparison with the great power that is in me.
Gold. You have not sufficiently proven by what you have just said. For although the philosophers speak of a single thing, which contains in itself the four elements, which has a body, a soul, and a spirit, and that by this thing they want to understand the tincture, physique winky face when it has been pushed to its last, perfection winky face which is the goal towards which they aim. Nevertheless, this thing must from its beginning be composed of me, who am gold, and my brother, who is Mercury, as being both the masculine seed and the feminine seed, as was said above. For after we have been sufficiently cooked and transmuted into tincture, we are then both together, one thing of which the philosophers speak.
Stone. It's not going the way you imagine. I have already told you here before that a true union cannot take place between you two, because you are not one body, but two bodies together, and consequently you are contrary to consider the foundation of nature. But I have an imperfect body, a constant soul, a penetrating tincture. I have moreover a clear transparent Mercury, volatile and mobile, and I can carry out all the great things in which you both boast, without however being able to do them, because it is I who carry in my bosom the philosophical gold and the Mercury of the sages. This is why the philosophers, speaking of me, say, our stone is invisible, and it is not possible to acquire possession of our Mercury. It is for this reason that there is only me, who has both male and female seed, and who is, at the same time, entirely, homogeneous whole, so I am called hermaphrodite. Richard on Lois bears witness to me, saying the first material of our Peter is called rebes, twice thing, that is to say a thing which has received from nature a double occult property, which gives it the name of hermaphrodite, as who would say a matter of which it is difficult to be able to distinguish the sex, and to discover, if it is male or if it is firm, especially since it inclines equally on two sides. This is why universal medicine is made of one thing, which is the water and the spirit of the body. This is what made people say that this medicine, which has deceived a large number of fools because of the multitude of enigmas under which it is enveloped, however this art requires only one thing, which is known of one each, and that many wish, and the whole is a thing which has no equal in the world. She is nevertheless vile, and we can have her at little cost. We must not therefore despise her, because she does and perfects admirable things. The philosopher Alan said, "You who worked on this art, you must have a firm and constant application of mind to your work, and not start trying now one thing, and now another. Art does not consist in the plurality of species, but in the body and in the spirit." Oh, how true it is that our Peter's medicine is a thing, a vessel, a conjunction. All artifice begins with one thing, and ends with one thing, although the philosophers, with the intention of hiding this great art, describe several ways, know a continual conjunction, a miction, a sublimation, a desiccation, and as many others, ways and operations, as we can name by different names, but the solution of the body is only in its own blood. Here is how Geber speaks: "There is a sulfur in the depth of Mercury which cooks it, and which digests it in the veins of the mines, for a very long time. So you see clearly, my dear Gold, that I have amply demonstrated to you that this suffering is only in me, then that I do everything myself, without your help, and without that of all your brothers and all your companions. I don't need you, but you all need me, especially since I can give you all perfection, and elevate you above the state where nature has placed you." At these last words, Gold became furiously angry, not knowing what to respond. He, however, held counsel with his brother Mercury, and they agreed together that they would assist each other, hoping that being two against our Peter, who is only one and only, they would easily overcome it, so that after not being able to conquer her by argument, they resolved to put her to death with the sword. For this purpose, they joined their forces, in order to increase them by the union of their double power. The fight began. Our Peter displayed his strength, and his valor, fought them both, overcame them, dissipated them, and swallowed them both up so that not a single vestige remained. So dear friends, who have the fear of God before their eyes, what I have just told you, must make you know the truth, and enlighten your mind as much as is necessary, to understand the foundation of the greatest, and the most precious of all treasures that no philosopher has so clearly exposed, discovered, or brought to light. So you don't need anything else. All you have to do is pray to God to grant you the possession of a jewel, which is of inestimable value. Sharpen after that the tip of your spirits, read the writings of the sages with caution, worked with diligence and accuracy, did not act hastily in such a precious work. He has his time ordered by nature, just like the fruits that are on the trees, and the bunches of grapes that the vine bears. Have righteousness in your heart, and propose to you, in your work, an honest end, otherwise God will grant you nothing, because he only communicates such a great gift to those who want to make good use of it, and he deprives those who intend to use it to commit evil. I pray to God to give you his holy blessing. So be it. The End.